You're listening to Thursday Night AMP on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
For Thursday Night AMP, it is the Angry Marks owner himself, Stevie J. How are you, Stevie?
I'm really good. I had a great New Year's Eve celebration. I saw the Iowa State Cyclones win by 50 points over Mississippi Valley State. It wasn't really competitive, but boy, it was fun to watch. And what a way to ring in New Year's Eve by hanging out with your friends, watching a great game, and getting to enjoy some libations afterward.
And Mr. Canada himself, Jordan Garber, will be joining us as well from Thursday Night AMP. Jordan, what's going on up there?
It's really cold up here actually, but it's great to be here again on Thursday Night AMP and the Undisputed Wrestling Show, and of course adding another big name to interview to my resume, and that is Nigel McGuinness. It is great to be here. How are you guys doing tonight?
Hey, doing good, man. Can't complain at all. I am your beloved prophet, professional wrestling visionary, Rick Craig, and we are on AngryMarks.com, the podcast leader for professional wrestling and mixed martial arts. And we are very pleased to announce our guest tonight. You may know him as Desmond Wolfe. We all know and love him as Nigel McGuinness, former ROH World Heavyweight Champion. Happy New Year, sir.
Same to you, mate. Same to you. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great, buddy. We can't ask for anything more than Nigel McGuinness talking wrestling on the radio.
There you go. Very cool. Exciting times.
Well, let's get this party started here. Nigel, you are in the midst of an incredible project, and I want to make sure you have plenty of opportunity to discuss it and tell all the wrestling listeners out there. I mean, you're such a busy man. The last days of McGuinness, I mean, all this stuff you've been doing over the years, you're adding another project to it. Tell the wrestling world what you're up to, brother.
Well, it's a 6-episode TV series, totally trying to evolve the professional wrestling genre. But I want to ask you guys, I mean, I can sit here and give you the same pitch that you can see on LAfights.com. You guys have obviously looked at it. I'm interested to get your take on what you think the project is, because some people have kind of expressed an interest, but they don't really necessarily see exactly what the finished product is going to be. So maybe I could ask you guys to tell me what you think the product is.
Absolutely. Let's kick it over to Stevie J. Go ahead, Stevie.
Well, my impression of it is it's going to be more like mixed martial arts meets professional wrestling meets reality television. It's like taking the elements of each that works and combining them into a cohesive whole. Yeah,
not bad. I mean, it won't be reality in the sense that it's not going to be showing behind the scenes of pro wrestling. It will still be a scripted TV show, much like The Office or Breaking Bad or something else like that. The fights will still be presented as real in that regard, but in every other way, yeah, spot on. The in-ring style will be a hybrid between pro wrestling and MMA, so hopefully it will appeal to people from both audiences, and the storylines will be, shades of grey, sort of more depth than the traditional mainstream pro wrestling storylines. But yeah, makes sense.
Well, Nigel, you said you've had this in your mind, you know, when listening to your trailers and things for it, that you've had this in the back of your brain for 5 years. When did it and how did it just strike and hit you? I mean, what made you decide this is something that needs to become reality?
Probably like 18 months ago, I started really putting pen to paper and trying to envision a fully fledged concept. Started thinking about 5 years ago, really. I remember when I was working for TNA and they weren't using me, and I was sort of sitting in the back and trying to wonder to myself, you know, why can't we compete? Why, you know, we've got Kurt Angle, the best wrestler of my generation, or perhaps any generation. We've got some really talented guys, Samoa Joe, the list goes on and on and on. You know, why are we not on sort of competing with WWE? And if someone gave me the ball, if I had carte blanche to start from zero, what would I do? And so I started thinking of ideas and how I would change things, and it became such a categorical evolution that really I don't think it's possible to do within 52 week a year sort of business model. You know, I felt like we get our content nowadays in such a different way than we used to even 5 years ago through Netflix, Hulu, places like that. You know, a lot of times we like to sort of binge watch series altogether rather than waiting every week. And as I said, I don't believe you can write 52 weeks of Breaking Bad a year. So, you know, that was really the starting point, that if you change the business model, maybe you can change everything else as well, change the in-ring style. That was inspired partly by me doing jiu-jitsu and sort of learning more of the realism, the legitimate fighting. And partly watching shows like Breaking Bad and watching shows like The Office or Modern Family, for example, and seeing how things are presented within entertainment now, and how we sort of are drawn into serial shows rather than the way they were perhaps, you know, 10 or 15 years ago.
Jordan, what do you got for Nigel McGuinness?
Pretty much, we'll continue to talk about the LA Fights project. And like you said, when did you just decide that you just wanted to do this? And pretty much from there on, how do you feel about going this far already? I've already seen the donations over your Twitter account, about over $25,000 donated for it. Did you ever think it was going to go this far and the word was going to spread this far so far?
Well, in all honesty, I need $370,000 by the end of January. So we're actually behind pace for where we need to be if we're going to make that goal. And if we don't make the goal because of Kickstarter, we won't get anything. If we don't get anything, then, we won't see the light of day, at least within its current format and how I've envisioned it. So I was hoping perhaps that it would actually get over more than it has. I was hoping that perhaps more people who have been sort of vocal in the past saying they'd like to see a new product out there, something categorically different, will go, okay, here's the opportunity to make that a reality and really get behind it. There has been a lot of great support from it. We've had 250 people plus now, 25,000, like I said, in 2 weeks. That's pretty good going. And had I only needed 50 grand, then we'd be pretty certain that this is going to become a reality. But 370 is a lot more than that. So I kind of hoped that it would be a little bit further along at this point. But I'm addressing what the issues are, I'm not just putting it out there and going, well, I'll wash my hands of it now, I understand what the issues are. People have been good enough to sort of like send me messages on AngryMarks.com and said, maybe they don't understand exactly what the product is. I've tried to explain more about that. They've had certain issues perhaps with Kickstarter and how there are so many other projects out there at the moment. And there are other products that have been out there in the past that got funded that didn't actually see the light of day. So I've tried to address all the people's concerns going forward because, this is hook or by crook. I'm putting all my eggs in this basket, really. I believe in it this much. I put that much work into it over the last 18 months. Because you've got to remember, guys, and I'm sure, you've all had similar sort of ideas yourself. We all must have done. We all must have seen shows like Breaking Bad or Sons of Anarchy or Walking Dead or whatever they happen to be and go, you know what? I think wrestling can learn something from this and can evolve because when you think about all the different evolutions of pro wrestling over the time period, they really have sort of been in tune with the pop culture evolutions of the time. If you look at WWF back in the day with MTV and Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T, it kind of fit with the era, with the cultural zeitgeist of the time. Same thing with WCW in the late 90s or ECW more importantly. And Paul Heyman, is being quoted as saying that music had changed. He had Nirvana and all these sort of grunge bands changing the music that people were listening to. But at that time, pro wrestling hadn't changed. And that's what he tried to do with ECW. So essentially, I'm trying to do the same thing with pro wrestling now. I'm not trying to compete with the current products. I think they have their own genre. And I will continue to support the Ring of Honor and believe in what they're doing wholeheartedly. But I do believe there's a place in the marketplace for a new product which will, show what is possible within genre.
Stevie.
Yes. First question I want to ask is that if you do get the full funding goal by the end of January, will the schedule for filming and editing LA Fights affect your role as an on-screen authority in Ring of Honor? Will you still be able to do both?
I believe I'll be able to do both. Ring of Honor has been very good in terms of schedule. I mean, I currently work as an assistant editor on a true TV show called The Carbonara Effect. And so that's Monday through Friday. And so they've been very good in letting me fly in late and do whatever else. So yeah, I fully anticipate to be able to continue my work with Ring of Honor, which I consider a blessing. I can still be part of a company that I love and believe in as much as I do, if you check out, further down on the page, you'll see, the schedule is in the frequently asked questions and the actual breakdown is down towards the bottom. It's an 18-day principal shoot. It's a 2-week, pre-production and it will be, about 3 or 4 months, I'm guessing, post-production to get this seen to reality. And that being the case, I can certainly still honor my Ring of Honor obligations within that genre.
Very good. And do you feel like there will be a little bit of deja vu that you've already got an authority role in Ring of Honor and, in LA Fights, you'll obviously in some way be the authority there as well since it's your project?
I won't be the on-screen authority figure. And in actual fact, someone even asked me this one of the questions after my YouTube video. They were like, they've seen a lot of, the dynamic within pro wrestling of having, the angry boss and the bad guy wrestler and them sort of going head to head. And I guess because it worked so well with Vince McMahon and Steve Austin, people have tried to recreate that. There is a boss, but he's certainly not the main focus of the show. The focus of the show are all the guys who are wrestling on the show. So that's really the direction that I'm going with it.
Fair enough. And actually, that does sort of lead me to a related question, because one of the promotions I feel like is doing it right now is Dario Cueto in Lucha Underground, because he's not the real authority figure, but he's presented on TV as somebody that's in charge. And I know they're bringing in Alberto Del Rio / Alberto El Patron. So how excited are you that he's coming to Ring of Honor too?
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to see him, once I knew he was on the free market and, we had an opportunity to get him in and let the Ring of Honor crowd see him. I mean, that's the thing about Ring of Honor that will continue to always be the case, is it really is the epitome of pro wrestling, of the art form as it stands in current day, is that when people come in there, they get the opportunity to work in perhaps arguably one of the most difficult crowds to impress. Because if you can do well in Ring of Honor, as we've seen with guys like Dragon or Punk or Joe, you can do well anywhere, because you have to establish your brand. You have to establish your ability bell to bell to get the job done. And I think that Alberto will do fantastic when he comes in. It's going to be a huge, huge match.
All right, I'll kick back to
This is the Undisputed Wrestling Show. This is Thursday Night AMP, brought to you by the Angry Marks Podcast Network. We are talking to the esteemed Nigel McGuinness. Nigel, thinking back with all the production work and things that you've done recently with TVs and documentaries and things, have you approached either before, or will you approach if Kickstarter doesn't work, like True TV or something like that with this project? Have you attempted to get TV funding?
I haven't. I did look into private investors. I guess you'd call them like angel investors that just, believe in the project and want to put some money in and see a return on their money. But really, the reality of it is, if I go that route, and that certainly may be a plan B if this doesn't get funded, unfortunately, is to go that route. To do so, I will lose some, if not all, creative control, and thereby we may never see the finished product that I actually envision. And as we've seen in pro wrestling time and time again, if you have too many cooks, you certainly will spoil the broth. And I think if you look at any successful professional wrestling company, that it really has been one person that had final say so, and that was a driving force. I don't believe that booking committees have ever really worked. I think you have to have one person, whether it's Vince McMahon or Delirious, or Paul Heyman, or Eric Bischoff, or whoever it happened to be. I really do think that you have to have one person. So it's not a direction I want to go in, but I believe in the project. And listen, I'm not giving up on this. I put a lot of my life into this, not just the last 18 months, but the last 12 years of my life learning the professional wrestling art form. I believe I've got something really special here that can reinvigorate things. I'd like to get it out there the way that I envision it, but I'm not giving up on it either way, because I believe in it that much. I just hope that wrestling fans that do want to see something categorically different within the genre, in the marketplace, get behind this, because that's the only way it's going to be a reality. I do appreciate everybody that's got beyond the product and is tweeting it and talking about it or whatever else, but ultimately it does come back to dollars and cents. And the more people that can actually put their hands in their pockets and make this a reality, that's the only way this is going to get done. Otherwise, it's all conjecture. A lot of people are talking about it and saying, this is great, I can't wait to see it happen. It will not happen unless it gets funded. So that's the reality of what we're facing here, guys. And I'm hoping that through doing shows like this and talking to you guys, and let me get your opinion, guys. I mean, from your standpoint, you've seen the pitch. What is it that you think is stopping people from putting their money behind their sort of belief that this will be a success?
I'll tell you what, me watching it, Nigel, I'm impressed with it. I'm fully behind it. Looking at the people that are involved with it, and it's pretty clear that Jimmy Jacobs is going to be doing some writing for you, but are you at liberty to talk about any other names that you have in there that maybe people will know to understand how many, people are involved in actually helping you get this thing off and running successfully?
I mean, the couple of producers who are on board, Jackie Palumbo, who is one of the producers on the Divas show and has worked with WWE for a long, long time now. She's helping me in the post sense, or actually because for $370, that's not a lot of money to shoot a 6-episode series. So she has a lot of contact connections. She's helping me out, making sure this becomes a reality. Andrew Reyes is a professional wrestling fan who's worked in production out here for a company in Hollywood, Beverly Hills actually. He's done a lot of work with some YouTube companies and some YouTube startups and big names as well. And he helped me budget the script as well. So I have a team in place. If you're talking about people in front of the camera, I mean, you've seen, as you mentioned, Jimmy Jacobs. Really, at this point, it will depend in the casting process. Can people work the style? Do they have the acting chops, or are they able to, more importantly, emote their own true backstories and feelings? And if they are, they'll be involved. It really is an open playing field in terms of who wants to be involved, because there is not a lot of money. Nobody's getting rich off this. I will make no money off of seeing this through to fruition. The only money that I'm going to see will basically pay my rent while I'm spending 60, 70 hours a week making this into a reality. I think that's kind of the difficulty with some of the Kickstarter things that people have done in the past. They've asked for a certain amount of money and they haven't planned for all eventualities. They've gone, you know what, I'll do this in my spare time while I'm working a regular job, and then it never sees the light of day, perhaps because they just didn't realize how much work needed to go into it. This is 100%, I'm 110% committed to it, and I can't do that obviously unless I can commit all that sort of time. So that's where we stand, guys.
How did you, Nigel, come up with the name LA Fights, understanding that you're living in Los Angeles? And do you have any concern that if this thing does get off and running, that naming it Los Angeles might limit the appeal on a national level?
I don't think so. I would hope not. I mean, someone mentioned the same thing on YouTube, and someone else said, do you think people don't watch CSI Miami because they don't live in Miami? It's kind of that same thing. A good show is a good show. It's an entertaining show. It's based in LA, but then so was Baywatch. So was, so many other shows, or wherever they happen to be. I believe that hopefully people will get the idea, get the concept, and, get behind it in that regard. I didn't call it anything wrestling because I don't want it to be the next, it's not a promotion, it's a TV show, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So to call it LA wrestling or whatever else, to me, I think limits it in that regard, because it really is an evolution of pro wrestling in the sense it will appeal to people who aren't necessarily pro wrestling fans, much like pro wrestling did in the 90s or even in the 80s. I think people were starting to watch WWF who didn't watch professional wrestling before WrestleMania or before the Monday Night Wars. There were a lot of people that came onto it after the fact, and I think I'm appealing to that demographic as much as anybody else.
Jordan Garber, you're talking to Nigel McGuinness.
You pretty much from when you found out about this idea, and how long did it take for you to advertise this idea once you just figured it out? How did you find out the idea about this, and just how long did it take you to promote it right when you came up with the idea and storyboarded about it?
What do you mean? I don't understand the question.
Like when you, with LA Fights, you, you sat down and the idea came to your head. After that, how long did it take for you to, just to find out how to promote it, and you eventually promoted it? From there on, how long did it, take you to, promote it once you found out the idea about it?
I mean, on Kickstarter, you mean, or what?
I think he means I thought you meant from conception in your brain, Nigel, to making reality out of it.
Yeah, pretty much that.
Right. Well, yeah, as I mentioned, about 5 years ago, I started to have the inklings of the idea for what could be done. Developed it sort of in my head, little bits here and there, and then over the last 18 months was really when I put the meat and the veg of it. And that's the reality, is that I've put a good 300 to 400 hours into this already, at least, if not more, writing the script, rewriting the script, getting it budgeted, figuring out how to make this a reality, getting in the ring and sort of seeing what I've learned in jiu-jitsu that can be developed into pro wrestling, watching pro wrestling, just put a lot of work into it. I really have.
Awesome stuff, and I'll put it over to Stevie, and after that, Stevie and Rick I'll ask you a few more questions. Thank you for answering.
All right, Nigel, my next question for you would be distribution for LA Fights. I'm going to go ahead and assume that it's going to be fully funded. I went ahead and made my pledge tonight here while you were on the air, so I want to know when it does get produced and it's all in the can, will it be on Amazon Prime, Hulu, Netflix? Where do you think this is all going to be seen?
Yeah, no idea at this point, and that really is the beauty of Kickstarter, is that I have an open book at that point. because I'm not, other than fulfilling all the awards, I don't have to pay back the 370 grand. Now, if I got this from a private investor, I would have to, and they'd want money back plus interest, which means that I can't just put it anywhere I want. If I don't get a decent deal with a decent company, this will never see the light of day. And for everybody that wanted to see a category, a new product, they may never see it. So if it gets funded through Kickstarter, the goal is to get as many eyes on it as possible so that it becomes a big hit. And then a second season, that could go in any of the places you previously mentioned. But that's all conjecture, and I wouldn't even hesitate to guess at this point. You know, a lot of people are looking for content. I know Yahoo's looking for content. I know Netflix, Hulu, they always want new shows. Even WWE Network probably wants shows as well. Whether they'd want to touch a product like mine, I don't know. But I guarantee you this, if it's funded on Kickstarter, everybody who backs it will see it and will be part of something really special.
That's fantastic. And I believe we were being trolled by one of our live listeners in the chat room, so I'm going to remix their question and make it a little more appropriate for you. They wanted to know about TNA, but instead I'm going to ask you, do you think TNA will succeed in their new home on Destination America? What do you think the future is like for them?
Now, I don't understand the financials of TNA. And what I mean by that is I don't know how much they're getting paid by this new channel, and I don't know what their bill is to run their shows. If they've got a good deal monetarily from this new channel and they pull the ratings that the channel is looking for, I think they'll do very well. I know that they're going to be the featured brand on the channel. This channel's a smaller channel. They're going to look for TNA to really raise the profile of the channel. And I think even if they get a 1.0 on this channel, there'll be more than any of the other shows get. And therefore, depending on what they're being paid, they may think it's worth it. I don't know. And I think if you don't know the figures involved, then there's no way really to say that. I do know that the channel is available in less homes than Ring of Honor, I think, and even less homes than Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, which is a good product out here in California. So it is going to be difficult in that regard to keep eyes on the product. That's all anybody can know at this point. I hope it does well. I hope it succeeds. A lot of people who are my friends work for the company, and it would be a shame to see people out of a job and not making money in the industry they put their life into. But again, part of my idea for this LA Fights thing is to show that this can be done, that you can make a marketable and, more importantly, profitable professional wrestling product that can be done on every level. Because you've got to understand, I'm putting out here a blueprint of what can be done. It may not be perfect, and I don't doubt that for a second. But I guarantee you what it can do is that even small promotions currently are having trouble making money by running 52 weeks of the year. They can run less shows, and as long as they have the performers that can pull it off in ring, and they can pull it off in terms of cameras, you can write the storylines, and as long as your storylines are compelling enough, I guarantee you can have a profitable product.
Sounds good to me. Rick, back to you.
You know, Nigel, you brought up Ring of Honor a while ago and saying that you still have every intention of honoring your commitments to Ring of Honor. How did you bring this up to them in the first place? And I guess thinking of a lot of people think of Ring of Honor as a large independent or a small, you want to look at it. Would they feel threatened by something like that coming out of you? I guess, how did you approach them, and how did you get them to I guess, give the blessing? For lack of a better word.
I smartened up Delirious beforehand. I made sure he was aware of what was going on. And if for no other reason, I really just appreciate his creative input into it, because there wasn't a part of me that was concerned from the competition standpoint, because it's not even in the same marketplace. It's a TV show. It's a series. A show like Lucha Underground perhaps could be considered competition, but I don't think necessarily even that, because they have a specific demographic, because it's a Lucha Libre show, whereas mine is going to appeal, I believe, to a far broader audience that likes MMA, but still obviously enjoyed what was good with pro wrestling in the past, So I don't see it as competition at all, even to WWE or TNA, and certainly not to Ring of Honor. So, as I said, I reached out of professionalism to Delirious, but other than that, I don't think there was an issue, and I don't believe there will be going forward.
That's outstanding. Very good. Jordan, did you have another question for Nigel?
Yes, for sure. Kind of sidetracked to your career overall. you, like I say, any wrestler, you finish training, and then you've achieved a lot of success and fame in Ring of Honor, and then eventually in TNA. When you started training, did you ever think you were going to go that far in your career as you did in your career?
Yes. Yeah, I thought I'd go further, believe it or not. Like if you watch my documentary, which you can see at NigelWrestling.com, actually I put it up on YouTube last weekend to try and show people what I'm capable of if, something that I get behind is funded through Kickstarter, For me, there was never any doubt that I was going to get to WWE and I achieved my childhood dream because I refused to give up, and that was what was so difficult for me not getting there, and certainly in a way that I felt was completely unfair in the sense that I didn't feel I was injured in any way, shape or form, even though their doctor thought I was. I just never had any doubt, I always believed that was why I was on this earth, was not just to get to WWE, but to be able to show that if you have a dream and you never give up, you can achieve that dream. But through not getting there and then creating the documentary that was funded entirely by all my fans on Kickstarter, through doing that, I sort of came to a resolution that you can still be an inspiration, you can still inspire people, and perhaps even you can be more of an inspiration to not quite reach your dreams than to actually get there, because I think more people in the world are in that sort of world. There are far more people that have dreams and never quite get them and have to deal with that than the other way around. So perhaps it's difficult to really identify with somebody that did achieve their dreams and someone who didn't.
And before I pass it off to Stevie, you're from London, England. So pretty much when you train, probably train in England, and then you're wrestling around the world. So my question for you, was traveling ever a problem for you, or did you enjoy it, seeing all the new places and wrestling in all these different countries and all that?
Yeah, it was good. I don't think I ever really appreciated it enough at the time. Certainly not in terms of Japan. I had like 8 or 9 tours in Japan with Pro Wrestling Noah that I really enjoyed, but because I was always so heavily focused on getting to WWE, and I felt like that was the end game, and that's when I'd make money, and that's where I'd be recognizable, and that's where I achieved my childhood dream. I didn't really appreciate the journey along the way, so I did get to travel. I went to Australia and Germany and various different places, France as well. But, and people always say you don't really get a chance to see that much of the country because you're there, you do the show, and then you leave again. And certainly in the earlier part of my career, I was working a regular job as well. So you didn't really have time to sort of take time off, and especially when you've got family and loved ones at home, you want to get back and spend as much time with them as you can. So travel was never an issue. I really enjoyed that, and in fact, one of the things I still love being involved with Ring of Honor is that every month or so I get to go away and see a different part of the country and see my friends again.
Awesome. Thank you, Nigel. Back to you, Stevie.
All right, Nigel, last time we had you on, when we talked about The Last of McGuinness, we talked about how it was bittersweet when you made it and you realized you weren't going to achieve that dream. You weren't going to be a star in WWE. But just recently, we saw CM Punk do a shoot interview where he talked about how he achieved the dream, and the dream wasn't what he thought it would be, and it was actually a bit of a nightmare for him. Do you think if you had become a star in WWE that, it might have been not everything you thought it would be when you dreamed it?
I don't think so. I really don't. And the only reason I say that is because when I went to TNA and I was wrestling with Kurt Angle and I was doing the tours of France and Europe, I just felt this is it. This is exactly what I want to do, Now, and this is certainly a fair point, that was probably like 2 months, 3 months before Hogan came in and everything changed. So obviously I didn't deal with any of the hassle that Punk dealt with in terms of being injured and the schedule, not only just in terms of in-ring, but appearances and stuff like that. I mean, he was on the road 300 days a year, if not more, in terms of appearances. So, in hindsight, having said that, you could be absolutely right. I honestly don't know. I think personality-wise, I'm a lot more like Dragon than I am like Punk, and I believe it's worked out as well for Dragon outside of obviously the neck injury and stuff like that, as he imagined. For him, I believe, irrespective of the injury, it was far more difficult to wrestle for Ring of Honor, certainly in terms of the style, than it was to wrestle for WWE. So who knows? I don't know. It's like the very famous comedian from England called Spike Milligan. And he's quoted as saying, money may not make me happy, but I'd at least like the opportunity to find out.
That's true. And I think Daniel Bryan has definitely made a lot of money. He may have been more acclaimed, for a time when he was the Ring of Honor World Champion, but even in the times when he was just in a tag team or, playing second fiddle for the times that he was in WWE and NXT, he's made a lot more money in a short amount of time. And that's kind of my question where I'm going with this is it frustrating when you work on a level like the Indies or TNA and you're having great matches and everybody respects you, but the pay is, not commensurate with what you'd get being just at the entry level in WWE?
Yes, very frustrating. And you say everybody respects you, but we live in a bubble, when you're a real pro wrestling fan or you're in the industry, to where you listen a lot to the sort of vocal minority. And I know there are various people high up in some of the big companies that have talked about the vocal 10% or whatever else. Now I do not dispute their viewpoint in the sense that I think those 10% perhaps are quite insightful to where they believe the wrestling industry should go. And certainly that's my 10%. That's the 10% I'm trying to appeal in terms of this LA Fights project that I'm doing. But nonetheless, you got to understand that even though I was Ring of Honor World Champion and even though I was very respected within the smart audience, outside of that, there was still millions of professional wrestling fans, and there still are, that have never heard of Nigel McGuinness, So yes, you are not making the money that WWE guys, but you also aren't getting the notoriety that people in WWE are, and it's not even with the casual wrestling fan. If you take a guy like Honky Tonk, and he was a fantastic worker back in the day, even before he had that gimmick, you know what I mean? But it was only through going to WWE and having that gimmick that he will continue to make money for the rest of his life, getting booked on whatever independent show that he does, because he's that recognizable now, Same with Jake Roberts or whoever else happens to be. Same with Dragon, same with Punk, same with anybody else, because Vince won and he has such a large portion of the marketplace. Any small independent will book a guy of that sort of ilk for the rest of their life versus someone in my ilk. And that was one of the reasons why I retired, is because it doesn't matter how much people will say you're respected as a performer or whatever else. Once you retire, in terms of getting booked on smaller independent shows, it's neither here nor there and no one's really interested. And that's the reality of the situation. And it's a business decision. It's not, it's nothing personal. If I was running small shows, I'd do the same thing as well. There's no point bringing someone in if they're not going to add anything to the card. And if you're the average independent wrestling fan, or if you're even the average wrestling fan in general, you never heard of Nigel McGuinness.
That's fair, but I also think, when the WrestleMania conventions come around every year, you're the kind of name that if they did bring in, you've got the hardcore wrestling fans coming, and they'll be lining up all the way out the door into the parking lot to see you shake your hand and get an autograph. So there's still that for you out there doing the convention circuit.
Well, we'll see. I've got to be more positive about myself. So yes, I'll go with it for this time.
That's true. All right, Rick, back to you.
Well, this is the Undisputed Wrestling Show. This is Thursday Night AMP on the Angry Marks Podcast Network, and we are very privileged to have Nigel McGuinness with us this evening. Nigel, a couple years back, I guess right towards the end of 2012, I was working for another podcast at the time and had the privilege of speaking to you about the documentary, The Last Days of McGuinness, right when it came out. Now we're looking roughly 2 years later. Did it achieve what you had intended it to, and what do you look at it in hindsight? How do you see it?
In some ways it achieved way more than I ever could have possibly imagined. In other ways, not quite so much. There was a lot of things going into the documentary. One of them obviously was what happened to me in terms of hepatitis and my feeling that intentional blood loss within pro wrestling didn't need to be around anymore. I talked to various people, Vince Russo being one of them, that really does believe that blood in pro wrestling has changed categorically a lot since the documentary came out, in no small part because of the documentary. You do still see it from time to time and place to place, but perhaps it is just one of those things like unprotected chair shots to the head that just takes time before it does become, widespread throughout the industry and no longer seen. But in terms of inspiring people, it's been amazing. The sort of the outpouring of people who've contacted me and said how much it really spoke to them because they kind of had similar experiences in their life. Not even just necessarily pro wrestling fans, people who were musicians or actors or anything else within entertainment that kind of had reached that same place as I had. and didn't quite achieve it, didn't know how to come to terms with that, how to move on, how to be happy. And they said that it really spoke to them in that regard. So that's been wonderful. And, I hope that again, it kind of speaks to what I can do when given the opportunity, because this LA Fights project, I'm hoping, will not just be a fun, entertaining show that involves pro wrestling. It will also give me the opportunity to talk from experience, and show people that it's okay to deal with certain things, and we all go through the same sort of troubles, the trials and tribulations, as people say.
You made mention about the hepatitis, and the loss of blood intentionally in professional wrestling rings. Obviously your situation's totally different than Abdullah the Butcher and people like that. But the wrestlers out there who make a living doing the death matches and doing the hardcore matches and things like that, how do you get that message through to those guys who that is their way of making a living in this business?
I'm not sure if I have to, really. I felt I had an obligation. I could have hidden away. I could have not talked about it. I could have very easily made that documentary and just not mentioned the blood thing at all and covered it over, but I felt I had an obligation. I certainly would have felt like, had I continued to wrestle, I would have wanted somebody else to tell me of the dangers involved. And I was always against intentional blood loss anyway. I mean, I only did it once in my career, at least through using a blade, and I didn't want to do it then. I was kind of felt like I was forced into doing it. And so I felt like I had an obligation to put it out there and say, this is what I feel. And then people are adults and they can choose to do what they want. And if they want to continue to wrestle and do those shows, then it's up to them, and they will try and justify it as the way they do, and that, they get tested regularly. And I think I should applaud them for doing so if they do that still. Or if they say they've done it for years and they've never got anything in the past anyway. I don't think that's a very smart mentality, because you can have unprotected sex with people all you want as well, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. And then if you continue to have unprotected sex with people, you'll pass it on to everybody else as well. And again, it's the same thing with bleeding in the ring. Yes, you have the right, if you want to bleed, but then doesn't everybody else have the right not to be in a ring with other people's blood? It's not as simple as you have the right, other people have rights as well. It's a complex thing. And as I said, once I've put out my theory and my feeling on it, it's up to everybody else. And I leave it, people are adults, and I let them make their own choices.
Nigel, do you think we'll ever in the bloodthirsty society that I guess that we live in, a lot of the Japanese promotions and some of the hardcore promotions in America, do you think we'll ever see a day when they're not around anymore because of the blood?
No, they continue to make a basic living. They eke out a living. I think that's the argument that CZW has for the reason they still do the Cage of Death, is that essentially that show basically funds them for the rest of the year so they can put on regular shows, And there's been similar arguments for other companies that have done other arguably morally ambivalent endeavors to fund pro wrestling. And, obviously perhaps I'm being a little speaking in hyperbole, but you could say the same thing about, organized crime funding a lot of very, positive things. And again, I'm not gonna scream from the mountaintops and take the moral high ground, because I don't believe it's about that. I believe it's about just speaking honestly and from your heart about what you believe. And if you do that, then it goes on. But, as long as there's still an audience for these things, and there is still an audience for these things, they will continue to exist. And there's an audience for a lot of other things that I don't agree with. And, that's just the way the world is, We have free will. And, as long as that continues, these things will continue also.
Jordan.
Yes, you have a good idea of this as well, since you are a veteran of the business, and since you are running this LA Fights project. What do you think What do you think professional wrestling is lacking right now in this generation?
On a mainstream level, it's lacking competition. That's the reality. And as I said, my LA Fights thing isn't really competition. It's certainly not positioned as competition. I see it more as a way of showing what these companies, and when I say these companies, I obviously mean WWE or TNA, can take little bits out of. And I think they are still trying to do that. When you look at WWE, they are constantly trying to see what is hip and what is happening, and whether it's Twitter or building their own network. they are trying to keep up with fads of the time and doing what they did in 1985, but it's difficult. It's difficult for everybody to do so, So I think they are just they're kind of lacking the ability to really tap into that and do something categorically different. But I think that's because they are in some ways limited by having to put out 2 weeks of TV a year, I think that there is place within the marketplace to put a category new product out there, which is what I've done with LA Fights and why I want to see this become a reality, because I think it can reinvigorate the industry.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
But let me ask you guys, here I am talking and telling my but you guys obviously care passionately about the industry. You have this podcast or these podcasts that you talk about what you think needs to be done in pro wrestling. Tell me what you think. Tell me, is what I'm doing, does it answer some of your questions? I assume that's why you asked me on this show, because you believe in what I'm doing, but I want to get your viewpoints. I want to hear you talking about why you think LA Fights will be, a good adjunct to this industry.
I think it's a great thing for this industry because it gives me that gut feeling that if these funds are reached, that this is going to be a new generation of professional wrestling. It's going to reach a new era. It's going to reach a new peak. And what
is it about the product that speaks to you? What is it that you go, okay, yeah, that could really change things?
For me, I'll say it looks like it could be everything that I see from The Ultimate Fighter when I get excited about that, meaning everything that I get excited about from Ring of Honor. It seems to me these worlds have always needed to collide. A scripted shoot fighting environment where you can appreciate that there's a story behind it, but you also get that real feeling like you get on Ultimate Fighter when there's real conflicts. And I'm very excited about that.
Oh, right.
I tell you what, Nigel, as the oldest guy here and guy who remembers wrestling from the early 70s, the thing that hooked me into it was the drama, obviously, of it, but also the competition of it. And I think when we hit the early 90s and Vince made that horrible declaration that professional wrestling was sports entertainment, it lost a lot of its luster from that point forward. And the thing I got a kick out of even as an adult was watching the NWA is because they treated it like legitimate competition, even though in the back of our heads we knew better. But they still treated it like it was competition, and it wasn't just a show. It was work your way up the ladder to get a title match, blah, 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 blah. That's the kind of stuff I miss. That's the thing that hooked me in this business and makes it more difficult for me to watch, WWE or TNA as it stands now. That's one thing Ring of Honor, I think, has brought to the table is legitimacy back in the art of professional wrestling. And looking at your project, I think that's going to help.
Completely agree.
And I think a lot of the time when you're watching WWE these days, you get this feeling that you don't get from Ring of Honor, where you get the feeling like, I've got to get my move in and you've got to get your move in, and then after that we'll go to the finish. Whereas in Ring of Honor, I know that I said this to you before when you were on with us the last time, you get the feeling that it's a real fight and that it's not that predictable, that it doesn't have to be everybody gets their spots in before the finish. And that to me is the other thing that excites me about a project like LA Fights is it'll be scripted, but it'll also be unpredictable. You won't be able to sit there. I'm hoping when I watch it, I won't think, man, I know what's coming next. Because for 3 hours of Raw this week, every single thing that happened, I was like, man, I knew that was coming.
I mean, it's tough. I mean, you got to understand, like, you imagine trying to write 52 weeks of TV a year and make it all different, and I don't think I could do it, and I don't think writers of shows like Breaking Bad or Walking Dead could do it either. I mean, you got to understand that we live in a world now where people's expectation for entertainment is that much higher than it was even 10 or 15 years ago. It's just evolved, and it's very difficult when you're writing that much TV to keep up.
That's so true. And speaking of high expectations, we always plug that Thursday nights are MMA and pro wrestling. Last time I saw you was in Vegas, and it was big fight weekend then. We got a very big one coming up on Saturday, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, John Jones or Daniel Cormier, who do you have?
Jones, yeah, Jones by a while.
So you don't even think Cormier's going to get to him and take him down?
I don't think so. I really don't. And, the beauty of UFC, which I think they do so well, and it's kind of cliche to say that they do pro wrestling better than pro wrestling does. But, I mean, really, with those big matches, they're so good. They're so good at marketing them that you really do believe it could go either way, you know. Now I'm an MMA fan. I'm not as big an MMA fan as a lot of guys are. You know, I only really watch the big matches and stuff like that. But, I do often find myself after the big matches going, man, like, how did they manage to convince us that, you know what I mean, that was going to be as close as it was? But I think they do a fantastic job with that. And I may be wrong, you know, and that's, I think, again, that's the beauty of what they've got there is that, you know, even though we may believe we know how it's going to turn out, we'll still tune in to find out.
Absolutely.
Stevie, I'm going to respectfully disagree with your assessment of Ring of Honor. I think if I'm going to be truly critical in a positive way about Ring of Honor, I think they've gotten away in the last couple years from what got them to their particular dance. And I think they are doing more and more spots and getting more and more carried away with reality everything anymore, finishing holds and finishing maneuvers and guys getting out of them. You know, back in the day, you got caught in that particular wrestler's finisher, you were toast. And nowadays, it seems like guys are kicking up and out of everything. So, you know, watching Ring of Honor now, I disagree with your assessment, Stevie. I think that's one thing that they have gotten away from a little bit.
See, I've watched the product obviously and been involved with the product for a long time, and I actually, you know, again, not to play devil's advocate, but I kind of do feel that there's less of that now. I mean, and I was guilty as anybody for kicking out a lot of finishes and doing a lot of stuff that perhaps I shouldn't have done. I remember, wrestling Aries in New York, that match where I got my head busted open on the outside by accident. And he was sat on the top rope and I gave him the lariat and he took he did, you know, the back flip and he landed on the apron to the floor. And like we carried on. I mean, that should have meant far more in the match than it actually did, you know, and I think certainly recently that the guys have been consciously trying to do that, you know, and I remember when I was champion going out there at the last match and going, man, how can I follow some of this? You know what I mean? Because some of the earlier matches had so much stuff in there. So I don't know. I watch the product now and I do feel like it's closer to what you're talking about than it was, you know, at least 3 or 4 years ago. But again, everybody's right to their sort of opinion. And I think it depends how much of the product you watch, and your own sort of sensibilities. And I know some people, have been vocal and go and, you know, they watch Ring of Honor and they go, everyone needs to slow down and it needs to mean more and yada, yada, yada. And what they've done is they've watched the first match, which has been like a high spot filled 6-man match, which is going to be go, 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 fly, fly, fly. And they haven't sort of stayed till the end of the show to see some of the main events. I mean, if you watch some of the matches with Adam Cole and guys like that really do take it slow and tell a story and build and make everything mean stuff, I think that's certainly still present in Ring of Honor. But again, you're kind of getting off subject there, but just my 2 cents.
And to be fair, Rick, I also think that if you look at the secondary titles in Ring of Honor, the television champion, the tag team champions, those are so much more significant than they are in WWE. You don't see those champions being fed to the world champion.
Oh, I agree with that.
I completely agree, yeah.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I'm not even remotely bashing ROH.
Sure.
I love ROH.
Right.
You know, just seeing what I've saw over the years, and to Nigel's point, yeah, it has gotten better. But they did have a significant period where it was getting a little out of hand.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, it's that whole competition thing and the understanding. And when companies lose the of wrestling, that's when they start to lose the fan base. So listen, guys, I never want to see Ring of Honor ever.
I'll do another interview in about 5 minutes. So
that's okay. We're wrapping it up right now with you, Nigel. One last question, if I may.
You got it.
You mentioned CM Punk earlier, Stevie, I believe.
Yes.
Now that he's committing himself to doing mixed martial arts, and I'm not an MMA fan, so I can't do it like Stevie can. But do you see success for CM Punk in an MMA? Do you think they're going to protect him and give him lightweight so that it doesn't lose out of the gate like these guys do?
He's a smart guy. I don't think they're going to put him in there with someone who's going to kill him. I don't think they're going to put him in there with somebody that's not going to add to his resume, or at least not going to make him more credible. They're smart, you know what I mean? It's going to be difficult to find an opponent that, like I said, isn't going to kill him, or if he beats them, he's going to add to his ability. So it's difficult, but that's matchmaking. That's what matchmaking is, and I think UFC I've done great jobs for other people in the past. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a win-win for everybody who's involved because we don't know and everybody is talking about it, like, CM Punk goes on Cabana's podcast and all of a sudden he has breaks the internet. It's like he moves the needle. It's a win for everybody involved, win, lose or draw. I'm excited to see it and I think everybody else will be and I think he could really set some records.
Well, speaking of moving the needle, everybody out listening to this right now, please take a look at Nigel McGuinness's LA Fights project on Kickstarter. If you're able to donate, get the wallets out, get the purses out. Let's help Nigel fund this because he is a guy who can move the needle. He is a solid dude in this business. We need Nigel McGuinnesses in this business. And you were talking about the convention scenes and stuff like that, Nigel. As long as you remain who you are, you will have a following forever, dude. We want to thank you so much for giving us your time tonight, and we really, really hope everything works out for LA Fights and it gets off the ground the way it's supposed to.
Perfect. Thanks very much, guys. Appreciate your time.
Always
thank you.
Pleasure. So thank you for coming on tonight.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Good night, Nigel. Nigel McGuinness, ladies and gentlemen, on the Undisputed Wrestling Show / Thursday night AMP. Undisputed Wrestling Show will be back on Tuesday night. We have Kurgan